Hello and good evening. My name is Daniel Cunningham with Rooted In, and I want to welcome everyone to tonight's virtual class where we're going to be digging deeper into the Grow and Go Garden in a Box, and we'll learn more about that program. Now, before we get started, I just wanted to introduce myself. Again, I'm Daniel Cunningham, a horticulturist with Rooted In. And if you'd like to connect with me and my colleagues, you can follow us on Facebook, on Twitter, and Instagram at that handle right there at RootedInTX. But without further ado, let's get started. Now, I did want to thank our sponsors, the City of Dallas Water, North Texas Municipal Water District, and Tarrant Regional Water District, along with Upper Trinity. Those are our regional water providers who we've partnered with to provide you this program. Now, I'd also like to give a special thanks to each one of our city partners who are serving as pickup location for the Go and Grow box. And we'll talk more about that as we progress, but basically you can order your box now, and we have a contactless drive-through at each one of these eight cities throughout the Metroplex where you can pick up your Go and Grow box. Now, the Go and Grow program kind of arose because gardeners many times would have confusion in terms of design and plant selection, as well as the maintenance of the landscape. And a lot of times we would recommend plants that we think are fantastic, and as gardeners ourselves have grown in our landscape, but sometimes they're a little bit harder to find at local nurseries. At least some of the plants could be, especially some of the native and adapted plants that are efficient with water, that attract wildlife. And so we really thought, how can we come up with a solution to kind of get past some of those issues? And a lot of times we just get people in our classes just telling us what to plant. And so we thought, okay, let's put it all together and design something that is kind of bulletproof for homeowners to take back some of their turf or to take back some of the shaded areas where plants didn't want to grow. Now, you can order the Go and Grow box, and all the information that we'll talk about this evening is on our website, which is rootedin.com. If you just see on the top of the screen there, that shop button, you can find each of the kits that we'll talk about this evening, and all the designs and the maintenance guide and all the pictures, everything, the pickup location. You can order your plants, all that can be found again at rootedin.com under that shop icon. Now, the two Go and Grow boxes that we're going to be focusing on tonight are those that are available to North Texans. Now, we do have a Central Texas box as well, so if you have a friend around the Round Rock area, you can direct them to the website, or maybe you're tuning in from down there. It's very similar to our pollinator pack that we'll dig into this evening. But we do have two boxes available. We have both the Shade Garden box. I believe there's about 60 of those left right now. We also have the pollinator pack with plants specifically targeted to attract bees and butterflies and many of our other native pollinators. And I think there's a little bit over 100 of those left right now. But what goes into that kit? Well, we've got 24 starter plants. They come in 3-inch pots. And a lot of times people think, well, 3-inch pot, that's not very big. But it was amazing. Before the class started earlier today, someone had posted in one of the local gardening groups. In fact, I think it was North Texas Gardeners. You can go on there, but their Go and Grow kit that they planted in the spring. And now many of these plants are not only 2 foot by 2 foot, but maybe even pushing 3 foot. In fact, I was kind of ashamed because it was a kind of an entry-level gardener whose Go and Grow box looks better than the plants I have in my backyard. She's really been taking care of them. And that's really what we want. We want to set people up for success. And once you put those plants in the ground, they say they sleep, they creep, and they leap. Well, sometimes some of the plants you may actually see that in the first year. Now, the box themselves are relatively compact. They're about 2 foot by 1 foot, but the plants as they grow will actually end up covering about 125, 150 square foot area. So those plants from 3 inches, they're easy to plant, but if you take care of them, they're expand in size very, very shortly. They'll easily fit in any car, so you don't need a big truck to pick these up on the pickup day. There are 3 design options that we'll talk more about. You can pick from your choice, or you can actually just kind of plant them on your own and fill in the gaps of your landscape. But the designs are about a 5-foot by 25-foot rectangle, a 16 by 16-foot triangle, and there's also a 14-inch circle for each one of the boxes. It covers about 125 feet. Like I said, you could space them a little bit further out if you needed to. The plants range in a mature height from 1 to 5 feet tall. The exposure, so the pollinator box is best in full sun to part sun, and the shade box is best from part shade to full shade. So there's 2 different options there depending on the conditions that you have on your property. Now, each of those are going to produce colorful blooms from spring to fall. So these are perennial plants that are going to come back year after year. Many of the plants will bloom, have extended growing seasons, extended blooms all throughout the growing season. Some may bloom spring to summer. Some may bloom summer to fall, or some may just kind of bloom but have pretty foliage throughout the year. So it really just kind of depends. We also try to incorporate some semi-evergreen plants and some evergreens, so plants that provide year-round interest. Now, all the plants in our kits are locally grown, so we work with a local grower. They're all going to be either native or adapted varieties. So I'd say 90% of the plants are actually indigenous to Texas. They evolved in our sometimes harsh and unpredictable climate. So if we have drought or even the freezes, a lot of people were surprised how well their plants did through the freeze that we have in February. So that's great. And there's a lot of pollinator supporting species. Even the shade garden has plants that have value to pollinators as well. And we'll talk about those specific species here in a little bit. Now, they also come with easy to follow instructions. So it's going to tell you where to put the plant, how to mulch it, how to water it, proper techniques on cutting them back and maintaining them throughout the year, fertilizing them. And then they do have those garden designs, which we were talking about earlier. We do landscape design services, and depending on the landscape that you want, traditionally that's going to be, over $750 or more for a design where we actually come out, measure your yard, and custom tailor a design to fit your property. And so landscape designs can be pretty expensive, but for $75, you've got 3 designs, and we tell you what spot of your landscape you can put them in. And really, we think for the plants and the design and everything you need to plant, that's kind of a bargain in comparison to some of the designs that we normally do. Now, the first one I want to talk about is the pollinator pack, and you can see kind of the small pictures of each of the plants, and this is what they come when you pick them up in their box. But the Greg's Mistflower, the other name for this one people call all the time is butterfly crack. If you follow me on social media, you saw I took a picture in my backyard of the monarchs. Kind of they're starting to trickle through back south, but not just butterflies. There's a number of bees and beetles and pollinator flies that use the Greg's Mistflower. There's black and blue salvia. This is one of the few that is not native, but very well adapted to our area. It's a vigorous grower. The hummingbirds really love this plant in my landscape. Turk's cap is one. It grows in sun and shade. It's a little hibiscus with red flowers, and not only is it great for hummingbirds and butterflies, but also it produces a fruit called the Turk's apple that you could eat yourself. There's lanceleaf coreopsis, wild bergamot, purple coneflower, Sundance rudbeckia. Each of those are native wildflowers that thrive, perennial wildflowers that are going to come back year after year. Now, we also have some host species, and one of those is the green milkweed. So if you're interested in attracting those monarch butterflies or their cousin, the queen butterflies, that is a great one. It's one of the best milkweed weeds that is adapted to our area. In addition to that, it also is a great nectar source for a number of pollinators. Then we've got rattlesnake master, which is an incredible plant. It doesn't fit into any of the categories we want to put plants into. In fact, it's in the daisy family, but its foliage looks more like a yucca, and just it's actually some of its cousins are used in floral arrangements like cut flowers all the time. There's also purple prairie verbena, which is one of our kind of lower growing native wildflowers that butterflies absolutely love. And then this is a new one, a plant that we don't see in local nurseries very often, but it is a Sinaloan blue sage. Beautiful sage-like blooms that are kind of baby blue. It's a little lower growing, so we may have seen some of our native blue sages like the Azura sage, but this one grows lower and it's actually semi-evergreen to evergreen. And when it gets cooler, the foliage is going to have a red or maroon tint to it. So you've got color in the foliage and then color in the blooms, and everything under the sun. All the pollinators really love those salvia blooms. Now, digging a little bit deeper into the designs, this 25 by 5 foot design is perfect along a fence or a wall. Typically, we'd put that on the south side or perhaps the east or the west side in a fence. We wouldn't want to put it on the north side, again, because these plants thrive in full sun to part sun conditions. So you'll notice that each one of these, as Patrick, our landscape designer, Patrick Dickinson, I'm sure y'all are familiar with him. He contrasts the colors and the textures of the foliage and the blooms. And so there's big swaths of color. So in addition to being great for pollinators, you really get that ornamental value that makes you want to spend time out in that garden and enjoy it yourselves. Now we also have that 14-inch circle. And so someone was talking on social media earlier about they wanted to put it kind of in an island around a small tree, and certainly that would work. There's also the triangle pattern, which works really well in a corner, so maybe along a back fence or a little pocket of your landscape that gets full sun to part sun. And again, each one of these designs is slightly different, targeted to be more successful in those planting areas, which there's really a lot of versatility there depending on what your landscape looks like. So now I just wanted to dig a little bit deeper into all of those plants. Now I mentioned Greg's mistflower and the butterflies loving it. This is the queen butterflies that we see pictured here. The matured height, it gets in that 1 to 2 foot range, sometimes a little bit taller. It can spread 2 to 3 feet. And so we do kind of allow some room for this to grow. But if you wanted to space this out a little bit more and you had time to wait, 2 to 3 years, this plant can really kind of take over an area, which is so beneficial because it is the best pollinator plant that I know about, that I grow in my own personal landscape. And it's just always a joy to go out there and see what's drinking from the mistflower today. The flower color is blue, so it's a light kind of a powdery baby blue, which is really kind of pretty in contrast against some of those pinks and oranges, even the yellows. Blooms summer into fall. It was a little bit later this year. I'm not sure why, but sometimes we can actually see it kind of late spring into summer. It's deciduous, which means it's going to die back to the ground each year, but the next spring it's starting to push back that kind of lacy-like foliage. Its water requirement is extremely low. So after establishment, the first couple months, you're probably not going to need to water it much at all, and it's just going to thrive for seasons to come. So if you were going to pick one plant for butterflies in your landscape, definitely for me, it would be the Greg's mistflower. And I mentioned one non-native. This one is native to Brazil and Argentina. It's a black and blue salvia. It's not invasive or aggressive or anything like that. It just is adapted to areas a little bit south of us, but does very well in our soil type. It does very well with our rainfall pattern. It gets a little bit taller, so these can be up to 2 to 5 feet tall, about 2 to 5 feet wide, so they can really kind of run. It's kind of like a taller ground cover, so it kind of creates its own mass planting. The reason they call it black and blue salvia is you'll notice the bottom part of the flower, that calyx, is black, and then the flower itself is blue, but it's more of a deeper blue. It's a blue that we don't really see a lot in a lot of plants. We kind of see some of the powdery blues, and maybe we see kind of the purplish blues, but really the true blues are a little bit rarer And plants, I love, all the butterflies that are attracted to this. We'll see bumblebees feeding on this, and then we also see a lot of hummingbirds. In fact, probably rivals Flamicanthus in terms of hummingbird attracting plants. Now, it's going to bloom summer to fall, has a large blooming season that can kind of stretch out further than that. It is deciduous as well, so this is one that's going to die back to the ground, works well in full sun to partial shade, and again is a low water user, so once it's established, you don't really need a lot of extra moisture. I mentioned Turk's Cap, and Turk's Cap is a great plant for shade. It's in our shade box as well. We have a slightly different one, but it also works very well in full to part sun. This one, again, is a little bit taller one, so you'll see in Patrick Designs, these are kind of designed towards the back, and so you can see the layering of the different colors and textures in front of it. It can spread too, so this one is pretty vigorous in terms of spreading, and so, just even a small plant in the first couple of years are really going to take off, and you'll have a big chunk of these red hibiscus blooms. It blooms from spring, summer to fall, so it has a really extended blooming season. Again, it does great in a variety of different sunlight conditions and is also a low water user. Lanceleaf coreopsis is another great Texas native perennial wildflower. It gets about 2 foot by 2 foot at maturity. This cultivar that we have is just going to be all yellow, but some of them you'll actually get a little ring of red or brown around the centers. Blooms from spring until summer. Mine's blooming right now in our landscape at home. It thrives in full sun, part sun conditions, does best in those, and is also a low water user. Now, this is an interesting plant. You've probably heard of bergamot, like bergamot tea, and it's just named after that plant because it has similar scents and taste, but it actually is used in teas and has been used as an herb, but it's native to North America, native here to our north central Texas region. It gets about 2 to 3 feet tall and wide, pink to lavender colors. It's also known as bee balm, and so you can kind of guess that it attracts bees as well as butterflies and hummingbirds. Blooms spring, summer into fall, and is another deciduous plant, which means it's going to die back in the spring. This one does best in full sun, but can also handle partial shade. In fact, when I'm hiking, sometimes I see this plant growing kind of the edge where the tree area meets the prairie or the grassland. This is probably one of the showiest native wildflowers, the purple coneflower or echinacea. This one's going to get about 2 to 3 feet tall, about 1 to 2 feet wide, with beautiful purple flowers that have kind of that center disc that is, kind of oranges to darker brown. This is going to bloom summer into fall. It's, again, a deciduous plant, thrives in full sun to part shade, and is also a low water user. Now, Sundance Rudbeckia, this is really one that is harder to find in the nursery. This one is native to our region, or Rudbeckia grandiflora. And this specific cultivar, Sundance, actually, it has won awards throughout the world. It's a selection from a native, but because of its large flowers and extended bloom time, we're seeing it, being grown in England and Europe and really all over the world. The flowers can get very tall, at 3 to 4 foot tall, about 2 to 3 foot wide. They're blooming right now, blooms summer into fall. And this is another one like Greg's Mistflower. You'd be hard pressed to identify and count all the pollinators that use this plant. Many of them are smaller, kind of dainty, and they're harder to identify. But we'll also see bumblebees and as well as butterflies, all different types of insects using this one. Light requirement, again, it's full sun and a low water user. Now, I mentioned the green milkweed, or Asclepias viridis. Now, we really want to kind of press home that the best host plants, or the best larval species for monarch butterflies, are really the ones that are regionally adapted to our areas, or the ones that are regionally native to us. And one of those is the green milkweed. Some people also call it green antelope horns. It gets about 1 to 3 foot tall, 1 to 2 foot wide, and it is known for those clusters of kind of light green flowers that have the white flower parts kind of star shaped on the inside. You're going to see these blooms spring into summer. And really, when monarchs are using those the most is when they're flying up from the forest of Mexico in the spring. And then the females will lay their eggs on this plant, and you can actually rear their young, which many of those are actually attacked by wasps. I know the wasps got to eat too, but some folks will grow plenty of green milkweed, and then they'll bring their caterpillars inside, so they're not going to be predated by the wasp, and then they can remove them outside and help them continue their flight to kind of the northern part of the United States. Again, this one is a deciduous, so it's going to die back. It's also good to save the seeds on this plant, so you can plant more. The seeds are kind of what they refer to as antelope horns. They kind of look like horns coming from the plant itself after the flowers kind of persist. But then you open it up, and it's that fluffy seed on the inside, and you can put those in a refrigerator. Maybe you want to put it with a little bit soil moist stratification, they call that, for a few months, or you can just put them in your landscape, and then you'll have green milkweeds popping up to feed more of our monarchs. Again, extremely low water user, easy plant to grow. Now, this one I really got excited about. We've had this one available 2 years, and it's extremely rare to find this one in the nursery trade. There's a couple local nurseries where you can find this one, but it's called Rattlesnake Master. And if you look at the scientific name, Eringum yuccifolium, you may have heard of another purple kind of cousin to this plant, Aringo, or also some people, I believe, call it sea breeze when you find it as a cut flower. But yuccifolium, that folium refers to the foliage, and yucca just is referring to yucca. So it has foliage that looks like a yucca, even though it's in the Asteraceae family. So you'd imagine that it would have a leaf that looked like a sunflower, but it doesn't. It actually has parallel venation and kind of these long, slender leaves that look similar to a yucca, which is really kind of interesting focal point, maybe a talking point in the garden if you want to bore your neighbors to ask you what plant this is. It gets about 3 to 5 feet tall, 2 to 3 feet wide, has these beautiful white flowers, and countless number of butterflies and bees and other small pollinators will use this one. It blooms spring, summer, into fall, and this one's actually an evergreen. So most years you'll actually get to enjoy that yucca-like foliage through the season. This is one I've only been growing myself for the past couple of years, but it's a plant that I want to propagate more and grow more of in my personal landscape. Now, purple prairie verbena is a plant that I did some undergraduate research in college, and I've collected seeds of these verbena species all over the state. They are super tough if you can get them established. It's really kind of a nice mounding ground cover, about a foot tall, 1 to 2 foot wide, native here to our region. Beautiful purple flowers. And the interesting thing about these purple flowers is about this time of day, like 5 to 6 o'clock at twilight, it seems like it's like you turn on a neon sign, and it's like they glow purple. It's very, the iridescence in this kind of purple is really interesting, and just a fantastic plant. Probably one of the most popular plants for nectarine butterflies, but you'll also see a number of our bees and smaller pollinators using those. Again, thrives in full sun to part shade and is a low water user. Now, Sinaloan blue sage is a new one for us this year, and it's one that our local grower has been growing for a while, and we see a lot of interest in the nursery trade. But a lot of times, that may be in other areas, and even though it grows very well in North Central Texas, local nurseries for some reason just haven't really carried this one a lot. And there's just so many great characteristics that we wanted to bring it to y'all and offer it in this kit. It gets about 1 foot tall, about 1.5 feet wide, is more low growing than some of the other plants we've talked about. Extremely long bloom time. So this one blooms spring, summer, into fall. And this says it's deciduous, but that's kind of a typo there. It's more of a semi-evergreen. So if it gets really cold, it will die back in maybe January or February. But really, if we don't get a hard cold snap into December, I mean, 10, 11 months out of the year, there will be foliage on this. And when we get those cooler temperatures, that's when you start to see the maroon twinge to the leaf, which is really kind of an ornamental bonus. But thrives in full sun to part shade and is another low water user. Now, those are all of the plants that we have in our pollinator pack. We try and have something for everyone. If you want to attract butterflies or bees, some of our small stingless native bees, or flies, beetles, hummingbirds, all different types of our crucial, critical pollinators are attracted to that box. We even have host plants in our green milkweed, but also some of the other ones are host plants for smaller butterfly species. Now, the second box we have available is the Made for the Shade box, and these are just plants that are going to thrive in those lower light conditions. So if you have a spot where you get less than 4 or 5 hours of sunlight, and you've noticed maybe your turf grass doesn't want to grow there anymore, or you've tried plants in that spot and they tend to struggle, if that was maybe it was growing underneath a tree, or you had a fence or something nearby that was blocking the light. Well, plants like oak leaf hydrangea and American beautyberry, the Turk's cap we mentioned, this is the pink form of it, which is super cool, kind of just more of a pink flower. There's inland sea oat, which is one of my favorite native grasses. I've got a big swaths of that planted on the side of my house in dense shade where really not a lot wants to grow. There's the southern shield fern, which is one of our native ferns. The purple Pallas heuchera, which is a hybrid heuchera or heuchera, you've heard it pronounced. Also, I'm blanking now, coral. There's another name for that I'm going to think about here in a little bit. But heuchera is what we're calling it now, and it's a hybrid between a native species and an adapted species, and so you actually will see some pollinators using the flowers on that one. And then there's Texas sedge. So one of the Facebook groups was like, I don't know why they chose that plant. It looks like it has sticker burrs on the top. And I had to comment, no. Those are soft. They do look like goat heads or the sticker burrs, but they're extremely soft. They're just the seed heads of our native sedges. And somebody else was like, is this like nut sedge? And it's like, no. I mean, it's closely related, but it's a very ornamental plant. It's used as an alternative to turf grass. It's really nice, adding contrast and foliage, grass-like foliage that normally would not grow in a shady spot. So you got that long, fluffy, linear foliage that moves in the wind in lower light conditions. So it's also evergreen. So it's like win, win, win. I love it. It's native. It's drought tolerant. We'll talk more about that. And then there's also frog fruit, which is a great native ground cover that thrives in lower light conditions. Now, again, the same thing as the pollinator kit. You get the design that is designed in a rectangle, the circle design, as well as the triangle design. And like I mentioned, you don't actually have to use these. These designs are incredible and they look amazing. To see these plants grow and thrive and the designs kind of take flight are amazing. But if you just want to grab the box and plug in, 10 plants here and 10 plants here and there are a few other plants over here, you can totally do that. But we want to tell you that we have worked hard to put these designs together to set you up for success, because I think that that's something a lot of times that people have confusion. You buy a plant here at this nursery and at this box store, and you're trying to put them all together, but really putting plants in combinations based on their color and texture can be a challenging part of home landscape design. And so we've just tried to take that guesswork away from you, but feel free to play around with the plants and move them. Of course, it's like Bob Ross used to say, it's like, it's your painting. There can be a little bird in this tree. You can put the echinacea over here, or the oak leaf hydrangea over here. Speaking of oak leaf hydrangea, this one is not native to Texas, but it is native to one county east of Texas. So on the Louisiana kind of the border, really it's the best part of Louisiana, right? Because it borders the Texas state line. This plant is indigenous, and probably at some point it grew here because it is so well adapted to our soils and our climate. these can get a little bit taller. So at maturity, 4 to 6 foot tall and wide, these beautiful white blooms, these grow way better than any of the traditional Eurasian hydrangeas that you've tried to see people grow that have the pink or the blue flowers, and they just hate our soils. The Oathly hydrangea love our heavy clays, and as long as you give them a little bit of moisture during the summer months, they really don't need a lot of extra attention once they're established. They bloom spring to summer, but as the flowers are interesting because as they stop blooming, they persist, and so they really make a nice dry cut flower. They're another semi-evergreen, meaning that in mild winters, you're going to see the leaves on the plant throughout the year, and they turn really bright red, similar to red oak, which one of the reasons they're called oak leaf hydrangeas. The shape is similar to an oak leaf, but they also have great fall foliage like many of our oaks. And then they really don't die back until we get a really hard freeze. So you may have seen on social media, I posted a video. My daughter and I were riding our bike, and I don't know if that was December or January, but the plants looked fantastic with bright red colors. And then in February, of course, they did die back. Part shade to full shade, low to medium water user. Again, you may have to water this plant 4 or 5 times really during June, July, and August. That's kind of the key. But once it's established, they're extremely, extremely drought tolerant plants. American beautyberry is another shrub that thrives in the shade. Mature height can get about 4 foot tall. It can get up to 6 feet wide. It has these long arching branches, which are really ornamental as they produce those magenta berries on the base. The flower color are kind of inconspicuous. They're white, but they do attract many pollinators. And then after it blooms, that's when you start to get the red berries kind of in the fall. It is deciduous, so it will die back. The leaves are going to kind of drop off the plant, but those berries can persist through the winter. In fact, a lot of times they persist until February, where the cedar waxwing birds come through, and then they clean up all the fruit that the other animals haven't gotten throughout there. So many of our songbirds do use this as a species as well, or as a food species. Thrives in part shade, full shade, even dense shade. The densest sunlight you have, these plants will work very, very well. Now, there's also the pink Turk's cap, and I mentioned this one, but just like the red Turk's cap, it gets about 4 foot tall by 3 foot wide. It says white in the flower color. We were really trying to get you the white version, and we couldn't get the white version on the market. But we did find the pink to kind of break it up from the red. These bloom spring to fall. They're also a deciduous plant, and again, like the red ones, thrive in full sun to full shade conditions. Now, inland sea oats, again, one of my favorite native grasses. It's great for adding texture, contrast, and movement to the landscape. Now it's got its seed heads on, and these are kind of shimmer in the wind. And then as we go into fall, deeper into fall, they're going to turn bronzes and even maybe some reds in there. So interesting inflorescence there. We call these semi-evergreen because even though they're going to lose their green color, you see many interesting colors and textures even throughout the winter. So we recommend cutting our ornamental grasses back early spring, maybe about mid-February to mid-March. And so it's 11 months out of the year, these actually look cool and you get to enjoy everything they bring to the landscape. And then right about the time they're starting to sprout back from the ground, then you can cut the tops back and enjoy them for many more months. Southern shield fern. Now, this is a native fern to our area. In fact, it's reportedly native to Dallas County and Tarrant County. Gets 3 to 4 foot tall and wide. Doesn't have flowers because it's a fern. So really what we're enjoying about this plant is its open, airy, lacy foliage and a little bit of a light green, which is nice when you're planting in deep shade spots. One of the things you can focus on is the nuances between the greens and the different kind of contrasts between a big leaf and a finer leaf. but also the different colors of the green. So you're not creating that green blob. You're actually creating something that is going to, create depth as well as a little bit of texture and color contrast. Now, these will thrive in part shade to full shade, and they also are a semi-evergreen. So unless it gets really cold, down to 20, degrees, 15 degrees, you're going to see this foliage. And then even if it does get cold, you may even just see the tips die back a little bit. Now, this is the heuchera, and I told you I'd remember the name. Coral bells is the other common name for this one. But again, this is a hybrid between a native species and a adapted species, but has incredible dark kind of purple to maroon foliage. And remember, I talked about the nuances with the color. Can you imagine this kind of a big, broad purple leaf next to the kind of lacy, airy fern leaf that was lime green? You put those two plants together, and it really makes each one of them pop. Now, this one is a little bit smaller, so it gets about 1.5 feet by 1.5 feet. It actually will produce a flower, a small little white flower, inconspicuous, that blooms spring to early summer. This is also a semi-evergreen, so you'll get to enjoy this for 10, 11 months out of the year, maybe longer if we don't get a really hard freeze, but very dramatic color with those purples and maroons. Now, Texas sedge, I can't let people talk bad about this plant. Don't worry, you're not going to step on those seed heads. They're extremely soft. In fact, they're kind of like those little sponge balls. When I was a kid, it was like those elastic balls that it was almost like they had hair on them. It's kind of like that. They bend under the touch. They get about a foot tall and wide. You'll start to see late spring and early summer that inflorescence form on there, and then the seed heads. They thrive in part sun down to part shade, even full shade conditions. It's a low to medium water user, so once they're established, these plants are as bulletproof as they get. Now, frog fruit is another great shade-loving plant, one of our native ground covers. We're seeing a lot more people use this plant, a lot more people ask for this plant. In fact, in our last plant sale, I think this plant sold out faster than most any. People were just beelining it from the frog fruit because it is sometimes a little bit harder to find, unfortunately. It gets about 6 inches tall, can spread a foot or maybe more, blooms spring to fall with these verbena-like flowers, kind of white around a maroon center, thrive in part shade, full sun, and even full shade. Really do well in a variety of different conditions. Now, in addition to all those great plants that I hope you're excited about as much as I am, we want to make sure that we're setting you up for success with choosing the right spot. And so as we wrap up here, I just wanted to overview our planning and maintenance guide that is going to accompany your Grow and Go box. And so, we want to ensure that your plants are going to thrive to thrive for season to come. We also want to make sure that we're not going to overwater them or over fertilize them, that we're actually giving them the care that they need. And because these are low maintenance plants to start off with, really after that first 3 months, a lot of that maintenance you can kind of taper off, and unless we have extreme drought conditions, and then even then it's just a little bit of moisture. But the ecological benefits that we talked about with the pollinators are great. But taking the demand off of our municipal water, and in terms of the shade garden, reducing the erosion that happens with the bare soil that you may already have in the shady spot, are really some of the added bonuses to these kits. Now, selecting the proper location, we need to pay attention to sunlight. So we talked about the shade box is designed to thrive in part shade to full shade conditions, and the pollinator box is designed to thrive in full sun to part sun conditions. Now, if you're interested in the edible box or the native box, we'll have those available again next spring. They were really a hit this spring, and we've heard a lot of great feedback. Now, speaking of the seasons, when you're looking at sunlight on your property, you should probably think about how the sun changes season after season. In fact, you may notice that the sun is more intense in your landscape in the summer as it sits overhead for a house. In the spring and the fall, the sun is kind of more in this position in the southern hemisphere, and then it drops even further in the sky in the winter. And so the amount of sunlight shining on your property and those angles as they change through the season really change a specific bed or specific area of your landscape, how much sunlight it gets or it doesn't get. So think about the orientation there. Certainly, your shade box is going to thrive in lower light conditions, but it actually may do better if it gets some sunlight, just if it's not the afternoon sunlight. So a little bit of morning sunlight, okay. No sunlight at all, okay. But probably want to protect many of those plants from the afternoon sun. So if that's on, if you have a fence blocking that area or a tree, that may be a great spot for those. Again, on the other side of that, if you're planting a pollinator plant, you know that it really, those boxes need full sun to part sun, then maybe that's on the south side of your landscape, or maybe the southeast side or the southwest side, but that will allow them enough sunlight so they can grow and they can thrive. Now, when you plant your Go and Grow garden in the right spot, your plants are going to thrive with little effort, and that's really the point that we want to drive home. When we're laying out our landscape, once you've picked the right spot, you're going to need a few tools that most folks just have laying around the house. So a tape measure, you could use wooden stakes and a string. Now that's mostly if you're going to have the circle design. If you don't have a bed already established, a stake in the middle and then a string will help you to identify your circle, because as you're pulling it around, that is the same distance, so it just creates a very uniform circle. We like using old garden hose just to lay out beds too. So you can take an old garden hose, kind of use your tape measure to lay it out, and that will be the edge. So if you're removing turf grass or you're establishing that bed, it just creates a nice guide for you to lay out, remove any current vegetation, and then you can go back in with your compost and your plants and any mulch you want to do. A shovel or a hand trowel. The great thing is you don't have to use a big, huge shovel because the plants come in 3-inch containers. Actually, a hand trowel works pretty well for those. If you were going to incorporate some compost, a spade, fork, or a tiller you could use, but it's not actually necessary. I would say that though, if you have the right sunlight conditions, also make sure you have access to water. So maybe you have an existing irrigation system, or maybe your irrigation system just consists of your arm and a hose and a faucet. And in that case, just make sure you have a hose that reaches those plants. So again, in those first few months, you give them a little bit of extra attention as the water, in between rainfall events. But if you can water and infrequently and deeply and get some moisture in that root zone, that will encourage the plants to grow deeper roots, and then they become more drought tolerant and more heat tolerant. Now, I mentioned you could add compost. Compost is one of the best soil amendments that money can buy, but you could actually create it at home. I think, in fact, most gardeners at some point have had a compost pile, and I think it's definitely a worthwhile project. Basically, it's just broken down organic matter. You can get it at most local nurseries, even the box stores have it, and it works as a buffer. So if you have problems with pH, if your pH is too acidic or too alkaline, or if you have soil that has too much clay or too much sand, it's really kind of the great equalizer. As you incorporate compost in the soil, up to even 50% of your top layer of soil could be compost. That is going to help those plants grow and thrive and hold on to moisture in that root zone during periods without drought. So for new beds, you can incorporate 1 to 2 inches of compost into the top 3 to 6 inches of soil. You could use a spade or shovel, or you could till that in if you want. If you already have an existing bed and you think you have enough organic matter in there, well, you could just top dress with a 1/4 inch of compost. So it really kind of depends on what soil you're working with or how bad it is. If your soil, you think it's really bad, you can certainly do a soil test to start off with. But compost is kind of like nature's Band-Aid. Any challenge you're having, compost is going to fix that boo-boo. You can tell I have a two-year-old who has a love affair with Band-Aids now. So you can buy compost again locally. Typically, if you buy it in bulk where they drop it off, you're going to pay about a third of the price. But for projects like this, picking up just a few bags will work for most folks. Now, the only trouble we've had with these Go and Grow kits is people, a month later or 3 months later, like, oh, my plants died. And we're like, the plants died? No, these plants are bulletproof. They couldn't have died. And they're like, well, yeah, I put it on the side of my house and I just been meaning to get around to planting them. And so we stand by our plants, and I guarantee you the plants, if you get them, they're going to be some of the highest quality plants that you can buy anywhere. Our grower is the most meticulous horticulturist grower that I've ever dealt with, and is a perfectionist. So these plants will be high quality, but you have to keep them high quality by putting them in the ground. If you leave them in their containers and you go a day or two without watering them, or if they're not in the right sunlight conditions, then they can start to struggle. So we recommend folks planting them within the first 1 to 4 days. So maybe you want to have your beds already laid out and you plan for how you're going to water those plants, maybe your mulch handy, and put them in the ground. Plants in the ground are a lot more resilient than plants in a small container. Now, plant spacing, the great thing about those designs, and I probably didn't touch on, is each plant tag is going to be a different color and have a number. And so those designs, you just look at your design and you say, okay, this is a 5 foot by 25 foot. Oh, red 7 goes here, blue 9 goes here, orange 3 goes here. And so it's like kind of, the coloring books that my daughter's using, kind of coloring, where they have the numbers traced out in the colors. It's really easy to plant the plants and utilize the proper spacing, because each design has a correlating number and color. Now, proper planting, we want you to plant them with the corresponding tags, like I mentioned, but we want to make sure that we're actually planting them in the ground the right way, not too deep and not too shallow. So if we plant them too deep, then sometimes those plants don't have enough oxygen, especially when we get really wet weather. If we planted them too shallow, those roots would be exposed to oxygen and they can slough off. So we want to plant it about the same level that it comes in its pot. So if your pot, the edge of your pot comes out to here, and this is where the soil line, well, that soil line should be either right even with your existing soil, or maybe your container is just slightly higher and you're putting compost and mulch right there, but you don't want to pile mulch or compost right around the base of the plant. Now, when removing the plant from the container, we want to just gently squeeze the roots. Most of these are going to have very well established root systems, but if we just loosen it up just a little bit and then gently pull the plant out of the container, that's really the best thing. They still are kind of young, so we don't just want to keep, just grab them and rip them out, kind of gently massage the bottom of that container and pull it out. We want to dig our holes about 2 to 3 times the diameter of that pot that they're actually grown in, and then just backfill with the native soil. Make sure you water it initially too. So what we're trying to do is put out about 1 inch of water to saturate the top 6 to 8 inches of soil. So once we have that root zone moist, then that should last us a couple days, maybe 3 days before we have to irrigate again. But keep an eye on them. And really, maybe you're having to water them, 2-3 times a week that first week. But as we start to see temperatures cool and as we start to see those root systems grow, they're really not going to need a lot of extra irrigation around establishment, or after establishment rather. So one of the things I mentioned is mulching. We don't want to see those mulch volcanoes on there. We want to make sure that our mulch ring looks more like a donut and less like a volcano, so there's plenty of oxygen and airflow around the base of the plant. And this is true with any plant in your garden, but also younger plants. We want to make sure that we're not piling mulch again the base of it. Now, watering, I mentioned watering after planting. That's certainly true. But then again, check the moisture after that first week, every 3 to 4 days. One thing that you can do is actually install drip irrigation. We just shot a video. In fact, that video should be coming live here before too long. but how to take drip irrigation and install it from your faucet. And then you can set a little bit of timer. And then even though these don't need a lot of extra water, if we go, 7 to 10 days and it hasn't rained, you can just go push a button and you can run your drip irrigation system. It is the most effective way to water. We receive less evaporation. More of that water actually goes to the root zone where our plants can use it. Now, a good rule of thumb is to water about in half an inch of water per week for our established native and adapted plants. But if we're getting that in rainfall, then we probably don't need to water, right? Now, it's only those periods where we go 7 to 10 days without watering is when we want to think about a little bit supplemental irrigation, whether that's with an in-ground drip irrigation system or hose-in sprinklers, however you water. Just make sure that you're not overwatering, and during those drought periods, you're giving them just a little bit of extra drink. Now, some folks may be asking, well, how do I get a half an inch of water on my plants? One thing we recommend is a catch can test. So basically, you're just putting a tuna fish can or cat food can or any container that is about an inch deep out with your landscape, and then you can water it and see how long it takes to fill up. And if it takes 10 minutes to fill up that half an inch, then you need to run that system for 10 minutes to get that. It may take somebody else 15 minutes, or maybe other systems 20 minutes, depending on what you are. Now, I would recommend that for your turf grass areas, if you're wondering how much to water your turf, you can visit waterisawesome.com. It's a free website. They'll send you weekly watering advice that you can kind of gauge on when you need to water and when you need to wait, but a fantastic resource for those that have turf grass areas adjacent to any of these box plants. Now, that is all I had for this evening. If folks are still with us and you have any questions at all, I would love for you to ask them now. My colleague Patrick Dickinson, I think, is online too, as well as my colleague Clint Wolf. And if you have a question, you'll notice that it kind of in the top of the toolbar, it looks like a happy face, and he's holding a hand right here. If you just click on that, you'll raise your hand, and then Clint can give you access to unmute yourself. And after you take that direction, you can ask your question. But thank you again if anybody needs to run. But do we have any questions yet? Don't be shy.
We do have some questions. Donna, go ahead and unmute yourself and you can ask your question.
I'm checking how to unmute myself. Am I unmuted?
You are. Yes, ma'am.
Nice. Okay. So I've been running around town all day trying to figure out how to get my soil ready for this planting box. I've told everybody about it. It's something. I have clay.
Thank you.
I'm in Princeton and I have complete clay. And I have a bad back, so I'm not sure how I'm going to dig the soil. So the bright idea was get a bed and do the bed 4 inches deep and put soil 2 inches deep. Am I thinking about that correctly? And then how much soil goes in a 25-foot bed? Those are my only questions.
Yeah, so that's a good question. Most of our local bulk compost suppliers actually have calculators on there, and that's something that we could definitely add to the kit next year, is kind of a compost calculator of how many bags of compost that would be in about 125 square foot area. Off the top of my head, I'm not actually sure. My guess would be between 8 to 12 bags of compost, and you can top dress it. The problem is if you're kind of digging in your soil initially and it's very hard and compacted clay, it's better to incorporate that compost into the top layer, even if you're just taking a spade fork and just putting your weight on it and rocking back and forth. In fact, that's one technique that many of the permaculture folks use to decrease how much you're disturbing the soil. But what we want is to have a little bit of a gradient between the soil layer and the compost. So you don't necessarily have to dig it in or till it in, but just allow where there's some overlap, and that will be better for water infiltration.
So you're saying, to recap, I could actually not do the crazy stuff. I could just dig a hole, put compost, mix it in with a spoon, if you will, plant my plant. Dig a hole, compost, plant my plant.
You could do that. What I would probably do is do it in those areas first. Most of these plants are adapted to our native soil, but certainly you could use that method. Yeah.
Okay. Awesome. Love your product. I'm ordering another one tonight.
Thank you, ma'am. We appreciate it.
Daniel, 20 bags of compost will do 125 square feet at 2
Okay.
inches deep.
He said 20. I said
20,
8 to 12. That was too light.
Thank you.
Priya, Priya. I'm sorry if I botched that, but you can unmute yourself.
Thank you. It's Priya, and thank you
Priya.
for the opportunity.
Sorry.
No worries. And for the lady who was talking just before this, I'm not an expert. I just worked on my backyard, which was like clean slate this past spring. So I believe Lowe's has a mulch and compost calculator on their website.
That's
So
great.
you can plug in the numbers and you can get it. And then for compost, I use this great place in Plano called Texas Pure Products. I don't know if you guys have heard of it.
Sure.
They have really good compost, really good native hardwood mulch, which is what
I think it's some of the best. In fact, Clint and I were just talking about that a couple of days ago.
And they deliver. So you can buy them in bags through the drive-through, or if you have a larger quantity, they will deliver, not in bags, but they'll just dump it on your driveway or whatnot. And I believe they have on their website, if you order online, they have a way that you can calculate how much of compost you need per square foot or whatnot.
They do.
So just I wanted to share that. My question for you, Daniel, is, can you tell me what Rooted In is? Are you guys a landscaping company? Are you guys a nursery? Are you guys consultants? I mean, I've seen your Facebook page. I've liked your page. I see all your events, but what is Rooted In? I mean, what do you guys do?
Yeah. So yes, we are all of those things. In fact, so the 4 of our employees, we used to work for Texas A&M, where we did all of those things. People would hire us to do landscape design. Primarily, it was for larger, big acreage projects. We did demonstration gardens. We also did education, where we teach classes like this one. And so we started this something similar to this plant sale, and then when that program was dissolved, we branched out, pun intended, on our own and are working on opening a nursery. The thing in the past year, we've been looking for land. So if anybody has 10 acres of land that they're wanting to sell, but we do plan on opening a retail nursery. At this point, what we're doing is pop-up plant sales, and you can find that information on our Facebook page, our Instagram, or website, rootedin.com. We do landscape design services, and so you can sign up for those on our website. We have a horticulture coach where we'll actually come out and just give you tips, any questions that you have, whether it's about a disease or plant or your soil, anything at all. We even do stuff with irrigation and rainwater harvesting. Then we offer a design consultation where if you need help with design tips, but you don't want to hire us to do a full blown out design, we can just give you pointers from a design scenario. And then we do full blown landscape design. So we'll come out and take the measurements and tell you, you need 5 of these plants and put them there, very precise. And then we partner with I think it's now over 25 cities throughout North Central Texas teaching their environmental education. So classes, ranging from composting to native plants, rainwater harvesting, irrigation, really everything under the sun.
Wow. So you guys have an office in McKinney, or rather a store in McKinney. Am I right in saying that?
We do not yet. So I think we're very close to making an offer on some land. But right now we are like most people or many people during COVID, we're working from home. So we have a place where you can come pick up plants, but it's just at our houses right now.
Okay, so one last question. Like I said, I started my backyard, designing pretty much by myself. I took some classes on, you guys must have heard of NIPSOT, right? Native Plant Society of
Yeah, sure.
Texas. So I started taking those classes, and with just my interest and a lot of reading and research, I finished my front and backyard. Of course, I had a gardener help me with all the heavy lifting, like the composting and the edging, but the design and the planting, I kind of did something myself, and it's not too bad. But my question is, like you were talking about the tips. So my front yard is done, my backyard is done, but I feel that there are some problem spots in my backyard where I don't think I planted the right plants. So there are some areas which are sloping and kind of gathering up water and stagnating. So some plants that I planted there did not make it. And then up front, again, the same thing. I think I planted the wrong plants in the wrong place. There's one spot where no matter what